As James said, it's a big day. Been praying a lot about April Faith Day today, with just full of anticipation. What is God going to do? What an exciting morning. I invite you to turn in your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 1 now. Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 1. In the last 2 weeks, we've seen Nehemiah receive heartbreaking news about what was going on in Jerusalem. The conditions there, the walls are broken down, the gates have been burned, it's a bunch of rubble. The people that are living there, they're vulnerable, they're unprotected, the defenses are down, and more than anything, we know that Nehemiah is distraught because God is dishonored in this. The temple is surrounded by ruins. God's chosen people, they're living among rubble. They're living in ruins. So Nehemiah goes to King Artaxerxes, and he asks for permission to go to Jerusalem and rebuild. And Artaxerxes says yes and sends him. We've seen that the last 2 weeks. Now, this morning, I want to start in chapter 3, and I want us to see how Nehemiah divides up the labor. And then after we've looked at chapter 3, we'll go back. There are some verses in chapter 2 that we haven't covered yet. So let's start with chapter 3, then we'll go back to chapter 2, and we'll see how Nehemiah motivated the people to action. These verses that we're going to look at this morning, they teach us about absolutely brilliant leadership, really. But behind Nehemiah's gifts, behind his gifted leadership, I don't want us to miss that the Almighty God, He is at work. Nehemiah has opened up his hands to God. And what we're going to see is God will use servants who are prayerful and they're prepared, but God wants us to open up our empty hands to Him and say, how will you use me? And we're going to get to do that today, all right? But we see it in Nehemiah's life. Nehemiah opens up his hands, he prays, and God uses him powerfully. So, as we consider this text that we're looking at this morning, I would love for each of us here, I'd love for you to think about what are the roles or the role that God is giving you right now. It may be that you're the leader of a team, a big organization. It may be that He's given you leadership responsibilities, and you can see Nehemiah's example, and you can consider how you are leading others, whether it's a sports team or at work or even in your home. Now, it may be many of us, we're part of the team. We're part of the workforce. And what we're going to see in our text today is God had a role for every single person in Jerusalem. Each person mattered. And it's the same thing here at Faith Baptist. Each member, each person matters. And so let's be encouraged by how God uses the leaders and how God uses the workforce too. So as we begin at chapter 3, I want us to notice 4 things, all right? I'm calling this section, chapter 3, I'm calling it a big task made possible by organization. A big task made possible by organization. So here, there's 4 things that I see, and I'd like for us to notice as we read chapter 3. Four organizational tools that Nehemiah uses. The first is this. He gave each person a place to work. Every person had a spot, they had a role, they had their part in a much bigger task. And so the question is this: if you're considering tackling a big problem, maybe it's at home, a challenge, or maybe it's at work, the first question is, have you given each person a role where they can contribute? The second thing that I notice here as we look at chapter 3 is going to be this. Whenever possible, Nehemiah had them work near their homes. You'll see, we're going to see it 6 times. It's mentioned specifically. They built right next to their home. Now that did a couple of important things. First of all, it reduced the commute time. Some of you all work in Orlando. You know exactly what commute time means, right? And Nehemiah is reducing that. They're working right across, they're working outside their doorstep. There's no commute time. They can get right to work. It also heightens their desire to protect, to defend their own family. When attackers want to approach, they're ready to protect because their family's right behind them. And it motivated them to do a good job. Whenever they open their front door, the wall that they rebuilt, they're going to look at. So let's do a good job because I'm going to have to look at this thing every day, right? But then also, thirdly, Nehemiah, It wasn't just for those who were able to rebuild right by their house. There were parts of the city where people didn't live, more the business district. And there were people that were coming in to help do this rebuilding project from outside the city. They didn't live in Jerusalem. And so Nehemiah gave the commuters real, valuable work. The parts of the city where there weren't homes, he said, okay, you're going to focus on that. They had meaningful work as well. And then lastly, Nehemiah, whenever possible, he gave rebuilding assignments to those who had a vested interest in that part of the city. For example, we're going to see right off the bat, the priests, he had them rebuild the sheep gate. Why is that important? Well, the sheep gate was named that way because that's where the sacrificers, those who were coming for worship, they would bring the sheep through that gate. So the priests, that was important to them. They served those. That was part of the sacrificial system for the temple. So they cared about what that part of the city looked like. So Nehemiah put them into that part of the rebuilding. What's the point? The point is this. If you are leading a team, the question is, are you looking at where are my teammates, where are the passions, the motivations, where are they most gifted? And can I give people work where they are most passionate, whether it's in their home or whether it's this is a way that God has led them in their life. In this case, in number 4, it's the vocation of the priests. They were very passionate about the sacrificial system, so they got to rebuild the sheep gate. Can you do that in your work as well? So we're considering these insights, these organizational tools that Nehemiah used in chapter 3. We have a ton of detail in chapter 3. And it's interesting, as I was doing some research on this and studying for this morning, there are books written on Nehemiah's leadership. They just skip chapter 3. Because there's lots of detail and lots of names and parts of the city that it's this gate and that gate. And we go, okay, well, let's skip to chapter 4 when it gets interesting. No! And you know from Ezra, every name matters, doesn't it? And God includes these individual workers and he includes their names. There's all kinds of encouragement in chapter 3. So, last week, we looked at Nehemiah and he was praying and he heard about the news and he prayed and he fasted and he waited 4 months, right? And then he goes to the king and we know he asked questions. In his preparation, he was asking questions. He was saying, what was the challenge in front of him? Okay, the challenge is the walls are broken down, and we need to prepare for that. So we said, planning is good. We go to God with open hands and we say, God, what do you want to have done? But it's good to then make plans and to act on those prayers. We submit the plans to God, but we should be planning. Planning is a good thing. And from the text specifically last week, we saw that Nehemiah asked questions like, well, how much time is it going to take? Because when King Artaxerxes asked him, Nehemiah gave him a time. Nehemiah did research. He knew Asaph's name. He knew the name of the guy that was in charge of the forest. So when King Artaxerxes said, well, what else do you need? He said, well, I need a letter to Asaph, so he'll give me lumber. He was prepared. He'd done the research. Who do we need to recruit to help? What resources are we going to need? And this week, as we get into chapters 2 and 3, we're going to see that Nehemiah kept asking questions. And he asked questions like, how can this big task be broken down into smaller steps? He asked questions like, where are my folks most gifted? Where are they most motivated so I can put them into places where they care about that part of the job? It's brilliant leadership because of how God is working through Nehemiah. And so I'd love for us to ask these questions. How has God made me passionate? How can I serve in ways that he's gifted me? If we're leaders, we need to be asking the question, who's the team that God has given us? How can we give them roles, give them places to serve where God's already wired their hearts to beat fervently for that issue? How can we put people in places where they're going to love serving there? So, one more piece of orientation as we get to chapter 3. We're going to take a virtual walk around Jerusalem this morning. And as we read in Nehemiah, and how he organized the people, I find study Bibles to be very helpful. This is a picture from the ESV study Bible. The CSB study Bible has a great map as well. And we need to understand the Jerusalem, if we visit Jerusalem today, the city of Jerusalem today, it's built on top of this ancient city. And so because it's built on top of the ancient city, there are some places that are mentioned in Nehemiah chapter 3. We don't know exactly where they are because people's houses are sitting on top of them now. And we can't really say, can you move your house over? Because we want to see what's under it. So these 3D renderings, these graphics that we find in our study Bibles, they're very helpful. And they're archaeologists' best guesses of, well, we think this is where that gate was, or we think this is where that wall was, because the current city sits on top of it, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do is I'm going to try to read well enough that our AV team, they're going to move a map around. We'll see kind of as we go through chapter 3. I encourage you to follow along in your Bibles, but hopefully the map will kind of show us where we are as we go. So let's look at Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 1. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose. He rose up with his brethren, the priests, and built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and hung its doors. They built as far as the Tower of the 100 and consecrated it, then as far as the Tower of Hananel. Next to Eliashib, the men of Jericho built. And next to them, Zachar, the son of Imri, built. Also, the sons of Hassanah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and hung its doors with its bolts and bars. And next to them, Meremoth, the son of Urijah, the son of Cuz, made repairs. Next to them, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabel, made repairs. Next to them, Zadok, the son of Bana, made repairs. Next to them, the Tekoites made repairs. But their nobles did not put their shoulders to the work of their Lord. There's always some, aren't there? I'm not doing that. We're going to see in chapter 6, when we get there in Nehemiah, why these men were not interested in working. Verse 6, moreover, Jehoiada, the son of Paseah, and Meshullam, the son of Besodeiah, repaired the old gate. They laid its beams and hung its doors with its bolts and bars. And next to them, Melatiah, the Gibeonite, Jadon, the Meronothite, the men of Gibeon and Mizpah, repaired the residence of the governor of the region beyond the river. Next to him, Uzziel, the son of Harhiah, one of the goldsmiths, made repairs. Also next to him, Hananiah, one of the perfumers, made repairs. And they fortified Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Next to them, Raphiah, the son of Hur, leader of half the district of Jerusalem, made repairs. So there's artisans, there's leaders, all different kinds of folks are serving and working here. Next to them, Jediah, the son of Harumaph, made repairs in front of his house. And next to him, Hattush, the son of Hashabniah, made repairs. Malchijah, the son of Harim, and Hashub, the son of Pahath Moab, repaired another section, as well as the Tower of the Ovens. Next to him was Shallum, the son of Halohesh, leader of half the district of Jerusalem. He and his daughters made repairs. I love this. There's sons and daughters working together with moms and dads. They're all serving. Hanan and the inhabitants of Zanoah repaired the valley gate. They built it, hung its doors with its bolts and bars, and repaired 1,000 cubits of the wall as far as the refuse gate. Or that's also called the dung gate. That's on the southern end, and they would take, right below that is the valley of Hinnom. That's where they took all the trash. May I humbly suggest that probably the houses right around the refuse gate, that was not the best place to live in Jerusalem, at least if you had any kind of sense of smell. Verse 14, Malchijah, the son of Rechab, leader of the district of Beth Hakerem, repaired the refuse gate. He built it and hung its doors with its bolts and bars. Shallum, the son of Kol-Hoseh, leader of the district of Mizpah, repaired the fountain gate. He built it, covered it, hung its doors with its bolts and bars, and repaired the wall of the pool of Shelah by the king's garden. That's probably the pool of Siloam, as far as the stairs go down from the city of David. After him, Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk, leader of half the district of Beth Zur, made repairs as far as the place in front of the tombs of David, to the man-made pool, and as far as the house of the mighty. After him, the Levites, under Rehum, the son of Bani, made repairs. Next to him, Hashabiah, leader of the leader of half the district of Keilah, made repairs for his district. After him, their brethren under Bavai, the son of Henadad, leader of the other half of the district of Keilah, made repairs. And next to him, Ezer, the son of Jeshua, the leader of Mizpah, repaired another section in front of the ascent to the armory at the buttress. After him, Baruch, son of Zabbai, carefully repaired the other section from the buttress to the door of the house of Eliashib, the high priest. After him, Meremoth, the son of Urijah, the son of Cuz, repaired another section from the door of the house of Eliashib to the end of the house of Eliashib. And after him, the priests, the men of the plain, made repairs. After him, Benjamin and Hashub made repairs opposite their house. After them, Azariah, the son of Messiah, the son of Ananiah, made repairs by his house. After him, Binui, the son of Henadad, repaired another section from the house of Azariah to the buttress, even as far as the corner. Palal, the son of Uzai, made repairs opposite the buttress and on the tower which projects from the king's upper house that was by the court of the prison. After him, Pedaiah, the son of Parosh, made repairs. Moreover, the Nethinim, that's the servants at the temple, the Nethinim who dwelt in Ophel made repairs as far as the place in front of the water gate toward the east, and on the projecting tower. After them, the Tekoites repaired another section, next to the great projecting tower, as far as the great wall of Ophel. Beyond the horse gate, the priests made repairs, each in front of his own house. After them, Zadok, the son of Immer, made repairs in front of his own house. After him, Shemaiah, the son of Shechaniah, the keeper of the east gate, made repairs. After him, Hananiah, the son of Shelemiah, and Hanun, the sixth son of Zelaph, repaired another section. After him, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, made repairs in front of his dwelling. After him, Malchijah, one of the goldsmiths, made repairs as far as the house of the Nethinim and of the merchants in front of the Mifkad gate. That's also called the inspection gate. And as far as the upper room at the corner. And between the upper room at the corner, as far as the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and the merchants made repairs. So, we've made it all the way back to the starting point of the tour. And the rebuilding process has begun now. And we can see, as we read through all those details, we can see how Nehemiah was gifted by God to put people in the right place. And I love the picture that this paints. There's goldsmiths, there's perfumers, there's leaders, there's daughters. People are serving, there's priests. Everyone has a place to work, and God is using them together. Now remember, Nebuchadnezzar tore these walls down, destroyed this city in 586 BC. It's over 140 years, almost 150 years, this city has been in ruins. For a little bit of context, some of you may be remembering when we should do this. Okay, so what is 140, 150 years for us? Do you remember that the city of Chicago had two massive fires in the 1870s? Hundreds of buildings were burned. Just devastation in that city. So if that city had been in ruins till today, this would be like us hearing today that Nehemiah has shown up to Chicago, a city that's been in ruins for 150 years, and he's seeking to rebuild the city. So for us to say that this is a big task, that's a little bit of an understatement, isn't it? This is a huge task. And so we're asking this question. It's happening. We see it happening in chapter 3. So how? How does this newcomer, how does this cupbearer to King Artaxerxes, how does he motivate people who they've been living among the rubble for decades? They've been planting gardens in the rocks that have been laying in piles. How does he motivate them to action? Well, he took specific steps of preparation. In chapter 2, verse 10 tells us these steps of preparation that he took. Let's look at chapter 2, verse 10. When Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. So in verse 9, Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem. In verse 10, we have Sanballat and we have Tobiah. They hear that Nehemiah has shown up. This official delegation shows up, and they're deeply disturbed. So that's a little bit of a foreshadowing. We're going to see a little bit more when we get to verse 19. But then verse 11 says this. That's Nehemiah. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Now, that's fascinating. There's a lot in those few little words. Nehemiah is a man of action. And there's a great project to do. So Nehemiah takes this big journey and he shows up to Jerusalem and he rests for 3 days. He waits for 3 days. Now, some believe that one of those days was the Sabbath, and Nehemiah was a God-fearing man. He was not going to work on the Sabbath. But he stopped for 3 days. The journey, we know, it took the last group, Ezra, that he brought, it took them about 4 months. It took at least 2 months. Anywhere from 2 to 4 months, Nehemiah's been traveling. It's a tough journey. And Nehemiah is wise to begin by recovering. And I think that this is an important lesson for many of us. We should not begin big projects. We shouldn't tackle tough assignments when we're exhausted. It's important to recognize the signs of being tired in our own lives and rest appropriately before we're tackling something that's difficult. If you have a challenge that you're facing as a family, I would encourage you, rest. Don't go into that family meeting exhausted. What happens? We get irritable. We say things we wish we hadn't said. We make rash decisions. I mean, the Snickers commercials, right, about being hangry, those are hilarious because they're true. So we need to rest. Now, let me hear this. I'm going to ask you to hear this warning, this plea. I'm saying this to myself. When there's work to be done, it's very difficult for many of us to rest. Like, no, we got to get this done. Let's go. And the second danger here for us is this. Many of us don't recognize how tired we actually are. And so I want to encourage you, if you're wondering, do I need to rest or do we need to slow down here? Ask a trusted friend. Say, are we good? Can we get going? Or no, do we need to pray about this a little bit more? Rest is important. And then after that, Nehemiah, now he starts acting. So let's look at verse 12. Then I arose in the night, and I took a few men with me. Now this is key. I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, nor was there any animal with me except the one in which I rode. So this is not a big delegation, small group. It's at night. Nehemiah is going out. And I went out by night through the valley gate to the serpent well. So he's going out on the side. I didn't put the map back in here, sorry. But it's over on the left side of the city, if you're imagining. To the serpent well and the refuse gate. So he's going along the bottom of the city, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were burned with fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool. But there was no room for the animal under me to pass. The rubble is so bad, the mule can't even get through. So I went up in the night by the valley and returned and viewed the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work. So Nehemiah begins by resting. He rests 3 days, and then he goes out on a reconnaissance mission. He wanted to survey the damage for himself. And I wonder if he had been reduced to tears all the way back in Susa, hundreds of miles away, when he heard the news about Jerusalem, what was his reaction now when he was seeing it with his own eyes? But the principle here is a good leader is engaged, and he knows the battlefield, or she knows the battlefield firsthand. He's not taking someone else's word for it. He's seeing it for himself. A good leader also takes time to prepare privately. He goes out at night. He takes a very small party with him. It was time for him to think and prepare, right? He needed private time to gather his thoughts. How exactly are we going to tackle this? One commentator said this about this. He said, before activity, meaningful solitude. Let me say that one more time. Before activity, meaningful solitude. I found that very helpful. So what did he do after he surveyed the damage privately? Well, let's keep reading at verse 17 and let's see. Then I said to them, you see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste and its gates are burned with fire. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer be a reproach. And I told them of the hand of my God which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words which he had spoken to me. So they said, let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to this good work. So, after resting, after the reconnaissance mission, then Nehemiah set about rallying the troops. All right? And notice the wisdom that God gives Nehemiah here. He starts off by saying, you see the distress that we are in. He calls the people to recognize the trouble. And this is absolutely the first step in motivating us to change. What do I mean by that? We get accustomed to the debris. We get accustomed to the rubble. We get accustomed to the dirt in our lives. All right? Don't raise your hands on this, but how many of us, we've worked really hard, we vacuum out the car. I mean, we take 1.5 pounds of sand out of the floors of our car, all right? And we get it all nice and clean. And the next time you get in the car, someone else has driven it, and they had their sandy footprints on, you see it right away, right? Yeah, you're nodding. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And you're like, oh man, I just got this clean. Wait 3 days, you don't notice it at all. Do you? Because you put your own sandy feet down there and it just, right? We get accustomed to the debris, the rubble, the dirt. And so the first step is we need to notice it. Now, the danger here is not only does that happen in our physical lives, it happens in our spiritual lives too, doesn't it? If we don't confess sin, if we allow stuff to accumulate, we get used to it. We get callous to it. It's a serious danger. So Nehemiah takes this first step and he says, look around. Jerusalem lies in ruins. Now, we're in the process. James just in the announcements reminded us we're going to have a town hall meeting this Wednesday. We're in the process of a constitution review, right? And I've been asked several times, it's a good question. I've been asked, why? Why do we need to make any changes? Well, I think it's a great analogy with what we're talking about right here. The response to that question, well, why would we change anything about our Constitution, is this. Do we understand the purpose of our Constitution? Now, there's several parts to our Constitution. One part is our Articles of Faith. That's what we believe. We're not changing that part. There is a section, and I explained this on Wednesday night, that we need to clarify our wording, and so we've added some clarifying statements in there. But the 18 Articles of Faith, those are intact. We're not changing that. Another part of our document is our processes. It's our operations manual. Now that part we need to update. Why do we need to update that? Well, because those operating procedures, those were written to face the challenges, to face the needs, to serve a community 20, 30, 40 years ago. And our community, even the technology with April Faith Day is a great example. Our Constitution says nothing about QR codes. The way that giving happens now it's all changed because technology has changed. So we need to update our operating manual so that it helps us face the challenges, meet the needs of our community, not only today, but if God tarries a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. Right? Does that make sense? But we're not going to change anything if we don't first see, oh, wait a minute. We can't actually obey this the way that it is because it was written for a church a while ago. Once we see the need, then we can address it. So Nehemiah then calls them to action. He says, come, let us build. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem. And this is exactly what we're doing. We're doing this with our Constitution review. Okay, let's build. Let's update this. But we're also doing this with our April Faith Day offering today. We've seen the need. We've been sharing the need over the last weeks and months. We have brothers and sisters around the world, in Wisconsin, in Haiti, in Indonesia, in Benin. There are real needs. See the needs, recognize the needs. Now, let's act. Let's respond. And we get to do that today in a few moments as we take this offering, right? I'm calling you James has been calling you. Let's be part of God's gospel work around the world. Let's engage. Our neighbors need help. We can give. We can generously, sacrificially give to help them. Let's be part of it. And then he's still rallying the troops. Look at verse 18. He encourages them. And I told them, the hand of my God, which has been good upon me. He shares how God has worked in his own life, and even the king, how the king has supplied the resources. That's going to become very important in just another verse. So if you're a leader, dads, if you're wanting to motivate your family, you're saying we need to make some spiritual changes, we need to grow as a family, one of the ways that you can motivate your team is share your own personal testimony of what God is doing in your life, how he has been working on you, right? It's a powerful way to share with others. Here's what God is doing. Here's what God says. Let's follow it as a family. So, by God's hand, the hand of my God, which had been good upon me, verse 18. By God's hand, he's at work. The people say, let's do it. Let's rise up and build. And so verse 18 is what then leads to all that we read in chapter 3. So, we've seen how a big task was made possible by organization. We've seen how it was made possible by preparation. And then lastly, let's see how a big task is made possible by God. And this is really the underlying principle of the whole passage. None of this would have happened if God had chosen a different person at a different time. This is all by God's hand. Nehemiah keeps telling the story. Verse 19. When Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem, now there's a third amigo with them, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? So I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore, his servants will arise and build. But you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem. Now, we saw the foreshadowing of this back in verse 10 with Sanballat and Tobiah. They were disturbed. They were displeased by what was going on. Now they're actually attacking. And they've got some specific techniques here, don't they? They laughed at them. They despised them. They accused them of rebelling against the king, which is obviously not true. Nehemiah has just said, I've got letters from the king. And we're going to look at this more next week when we get to chapter 4. But for right now, let me make two observations about this. One is this: Satan is always going to try to oppose God's work. Always. And so if we're seeking to obey God and honor him with the choices that we're making in our lives, we must anticipate that there are going to be those that oppose us. Satan will use opposition. There are going to be naysayers in our lives. And so as you seek to obey God, don't be discouraged when there is opposition. We need to expect that. And secondly, we reminded ourselves of this on Wednesday night. How do we respond when people are opposing us trying to obey God? We do exactly what Nehemiah does. He says, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. What is he doing? He's keeping his eyes focused on Jesus. And we read from Hebrews chapter 12 on Wednesday night. Jesus is the author and the finisher of our faith, right? He says, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And so Nehemiah turns his attention and their attention back to God and says, God's going to do this. The God of heaven is going to prosper us. So he got it right. So how does a big task become possible? How do you climb an insurmountable mountain? God's the one that does it. We don't do it. We open up our hands to him and we follow him, right? We do it with God's help in God's way. We said at the very beginning of this series, great problems are overcome by a great God. And I read this past week. God's hand reverses the irreversible. This city had been in ruins for over 140 years. To see that task from the outside, you'd say, there's no way they're going to do this. Nehemiah is a cupbearer. He's not an architect. He's not an engineer. They don't have bulldozers and caterpillars, and backhoes, right? How are they going to do this? God. And we can ask a question. How can a little church take an offering? We're seeking God's face for $153,000. How does a little church do that? There's only one way. It's only by God's grace, and it's only by His provision. That's the only way it happens. And so if it happens, when it happens, all the praise and all the honor and all the glory go to Him, doesn't it? What this reminds me of is this. Nehemiah tells them, you're not part of this work. This is God's city. This is God's work, and we're going to do it. And when I was studying that and reading that, it reminded me of what Jesus said to the disciples in Matthew chapter 16. He said this, I say to you that you are Peter. And he says, on this rock I will build my church. And then he says this phrase, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Why do I take such great encouragement from that verse? Because of this. God told the Israelites, I will bring you back. From being scattered in captivity, I will bring you back. You will worship me again in Jerusalem. And God was keeping His promise. And Jesus gave us a promise that He's going to build His church. And not Satan, nothing can stop Jesus from building His church. So, do you want to be a part of something that God has already promised is going to happen? I do. Then be part of building the church. Because Jesus says, this is what I'm doing, and nothing is going to stop me. So that gets me very excited about being part of, okay, let's be part of what God is doing. He's told us what He's doing. So let's get on board, right? So what have we learned today? Big tasks are made possible when God leads, and when He moves, and when He provides. Big tasks are also made possible through rested and prepared leaders. I'm so encouraged that God chose to use Nehemiah, and He chose to use all these names that are tough for me to pronounce. He chose to use people like you and me. They opened up their hands, and they grabbed a trowel. And we're going to see next week, and they grabbed a sword. But God works through people who open up their hands to Him. And they approach Him in prayer and say, how can you use me? Big tasks are made possible through intentional, thoughtful preparation on the part and organization on the part of a leader. And so I hope that you've been challenged this morning. Whatever task that you're facing, maybe you're a leader, maybe you're one of the followers, but I hope that you've been encouraged that there is a way to honor God, and we can obey Him and we can please Him if we will prayerfully submit to what He's doing. So, we have a big task in front of us, right? April Faith Day. And we've prayed much. We've prayed much about this. We've prepared. A team of people have researched. They've written emails. They've sent texts. They've made phone calls. They've gathered information. We presented all that information before God in prayer. Weeks and weeks and weeks of prayer went in before any announcement was ever made. We've asked for God's favor. We've asked for His leading, even in the projects that are on the screen. And we asked Him for the amounts. What do we do? How do we respond? How would you lead us today? And so here we are. We are now asking God to provide more than $153,000 through this offering. That's a big task. But it's absolutely nothing in God's economy. It's a big deal to us. But God's not worried about how many zeros are behind that 153. Because all the money is His, isn't it? So, here's how we're going to take our offering this morning. I'm going to invite the ushers to come forward in a moment. We're going to remain seated, and we're going to sing, Great is Thy Faithfulness. Amazing song. If you don't have any cash, if you don't have a check, what you can do is, in the bulletin on the back, you'll see the QR code. And that QR code, if you scan that, that should take you straight to the April Faith Day offering, and you can be part of the offering that we're taking. All the funds that are gathered in this offering, they will go towards meeting these needs. And then at the end of the song, the ushers are going to come forward, and I've asked Matt Vector, he's our finance committee chair, I've asked him if he will pray a prayer of thankfulness for what God has done. And then after that, we're going to get to stand, and we're going to get to sing our final song, To God Be the Glory. All right, so let's pray now as we prepare to take this offering. Father, I thank you for the example of Nehemiah. He was just a man, but he was a man that you used powerfully in your work. And we're just people here this morning, and you know that. But we're asking that you use us powerfully in your gospel work as well. We long to see that church built in Haiti. We long to see our family, our missionary family, the Armstrongs, have a vehicle that they can fit all of their kids in. That those orphans that they're taking into their orphanage, that they can transport them safely. Father, we long to see that camp in Benin built for your honor and your praise. And so we're asking, would you please take our gifts today and multiply them all for your praise and all for your glory. And it's in your precious Son's name that we come to you. Amen.